What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, October 22nd, 2018. Start of a brand new week of all kinds of things going on here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and opinions. So let's just get right on into it. A lot of things going on. News just came on out here. I've been talking a lot about Hawaii's Representative Tulsi Gabbard, who is obviously running for re-election in the midterms in 2 weeks' time. But apparently she is, in fact, seriously considering entering the Democratic primaries in 2020. So go Tulsi. And she just shot to the top of my list of preferred 2020 candidates. And so we'll see what's going to happen with that. Let's start with the conflict zones before anything else here. And now that we're getting close to the end of the situation in Syria, barring the United States just going back on in and starting the war all over again, people are looking back and they're tallying things up here. And apparently Russian forces eliminated 87,500 terrorists during the Syria operation. That's a lot. That's a lot of people, and basically Russian air forces carried out more than 40,000 flights, including 21,000 nighttime operations, resulting in 122,000 strikes on terrorist facilities. And so, yeah, that was a major operation. Now, the United States, once again, is being accused of killing civilians in Syria. And believe it or not, they're trying to defend themselves, saying that this mosque that got bombed was a legitimate military target. Well, I'm sorry, unless you can prove to me that those minarets were actually rocket launchers, no, a mosque is not a legitimate military target here. Last week, we reported on how archaeological treasures were being looted by Daesh, even by some American and French forces. And apparently the Syrian security forces have recovered much of the Roman-era artifacts that were stolen by ISIS from Palmyra. And apparently the Syrian forces uncovered this cache of artifacts while combing through a building that was the site of ISIS old headquarters. So they had to leave all that stuff behind when they left. And it's good that they got that back, because that connects them with their history, and that's a very, very important thing. Speaking of history, I got an email from somebody who said that he had a friend who wanted to donate some history books to the local library, and the library turned them down, saying they're not on a par with current teaching. In other words, the history they're teaching now has been edited and altered, and we don't want to teach that old history of what actually happened. Now it has to be politically correct. All right. Now, U.S.-backed forces send a large number of reinforcements to an important oil field in Deir ez-Zor. Got to protect that oil. Got to protect the oil revenues. That oil is important. Remember when they went into Iraq? Left the Baghdad Museum wide open. It got looted and plundered. But boy, they had armed security around that oil ministry building. Same thing here. And the Syrian Democratic forces are guarding this field. And there's speculation it may be because this oil field is very close to the Syrian Arab army's lines. In other words, Syrian government forces are moving to retake control of Syria's oil fields, because one of the ways that the opposition has been funding itself is stealing Syria's oil, smuggling it out across the Turkish border and selling it. And obviously, to cut off the funding for the terrorists, Syria wants to regain control of those oil fields. Russia is now setting up a new air base near the T4 military airport in Homs province in central Syria to deploy advanced air defense units following the delivery of the S-300 air defense systems to Damascus. Now, of course, Russia has every right to be there. They're there at the invitation of the Syrian government, unlike the United States of America. And they're saying that Russia will probably deploy modern air defense batteries in its under construction base. Meantime, quoting other sources, Russia is likely to deploy S-300 air defense system at that base. So they're bringing in a lot of this stuff here. Okay, now, the refugees that are in areas under control of the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, who are, for the most part, not Syrian and definitely not democratic, they are deliberately worsening the living conditions in the refugee camps in order to force young men to join the SDF combat forces. In other words, basically, they're shutting off the food and water and saying, if you want to eat and you want to have water to drink, you got to put on the uniform. And apparently the Syrian Democratic Forces have sent expired consignments of medicines and foodstuff to the camp, which have resulted in a lot of illness among the children. Oh yes, how wonderfully humanitarian. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Meanwhile, Turkey has issued what they're saying is their last warning to the jihadist rebels to leave the Idlib buffer zone. As you know, there was this deal that was set up with Russia and Turkey to have a deconfliction zone around Idlib and avoid a direct attack, which the U.S. is saying that if there is an attack, any attack anywhere, doesn't even have to be chemical weapons, the U.S. will come on back in. So Russia and Turkey said, well, we'll just draw this little deconfliction zone around Idlib, and we'll leave everything just sitting in place and just wait until the United States gets bored and goes home. But some of the terrorist groups inside the deconfliction zone are still refusing to leave, probably under orders from Washington, D.C. So apparently, if these rebels refuse to leave the buffer zone, Turkey will allow the Syrian Arab Army and the Russian Air Force to resume their operations against them in northwestern Syria. So this is possibly going to heat up a little bit more. Now, last week, I made a comment about how all of a sudden Putin had changed his rhetoric. Up until now, he's been the statesman, he's been the voice of calm and restraint. But when he was speaking at the Valdai Economic Forum, he started talking a lot tougher about how Russia was ready to respond to a nuclear attack. And people were very much paying attention. And so according to this article that came on out from LouRockwell.com, what was going on was Putin was laying down the law for pretty much everyone on the planet. He's laying down the new rules of conduct in geopolitical affairs, and he put the U.S. and the European oligarchs, the Davos crowd, on notice, saying, I guess what Putin is saying, this has gone on long enough. All of these regime changes, all of this plundering of all these other countries, it's gone on long enough. It's time for it to stop. Okay. So let's talk about the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Pretty much everybody out there is saying Trump's unilateral withdrawal is a bad idea. And it's basically opening up a whole new period of escalation. Because without that treaty, everybody's going to start building more and more of these 500 to 1,500 kilometer range nuclear-tipped ground-launched cruise missiles. Now, obviously, this is going to be good news for the companies that make these weapons. Bad news for everybody that's going to have to pay for them. And, of course, the more and more of these weapons you have, the greater the possibility they're going to get used, either deliberately or by accident. Which, if you remember the history of the first Cold War, there were a couple of near misses One was caused by malfunctioning computer equipment. And fortunately, there was a human commander who was in charge who said, I'm not buying this. Something is wrong. And he refused to turn the key. And you've all seen the movie War Games, right? That's actually based on a true incident that happened at Cheyenne Mountain. Now, there wasn't a kid on the outside that hacked on in and started things, but there was a training tape that was being played onto the main computers and displays in that control room. And the controllers hadn't gotten word it was a training tape. They thought they were watching a real Russian attack, and they almost launched on the Soviet Union. So it's a very risky situation to have these. And there's an article, again, Lou Rockwell, saying that this is going to lead to complete chaos. Gorbachev is out there saying that Trump's plan to pull out of the INF and demand a better version of the INF is going to undermine disarmament. And Trump is not going to be any more successful getting a new, improved INF treaty than he has been getting a new Iran nuclear deal. All he's doing is sending a message to the rest of the world that the United States cannot be counted on to keep its treaties. Now, Gorbachev actually signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty with Reagan back in 1987. Now, Trump is saying Russia's been violating the INF for many years. Russia's saying the U.S. has been violating the INF for many years. And Russia is condemning this plan here. Germany is criticizing the move. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas is saying Washington ought to consider the consequences both for Europe and for future disarmament efforts. Well, clearly, President Trump and his cronies are not interested in disarmament. They're interested in taking more of your money and spending them on things that go boom. In fact, last Friday, Trump came out with a comment related to this saying, yeah, we can build all these. We got plenty of money to spend on weapons. Mr. President, no, you don't. Look at the cracks in the roads. Look at the rusty rails on the train system. Look at all the bridges that are considered structurally deficient. Look at all the dams hovering at the edge of collapse. Look at all the homeless and hungry in the streets of America. Don't tell me that you've got lots of money to pay for the military when the people of this country are in such serious trouble. All right, let's take a phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, none of their friends are hungry. None of the homeless are in their sphere of influence, if you know what I mean. They don't care. You know, Trump, I'm off the Trump train a while ago, but anybody who still calls in rooting for Trump, wake the heck up. The guy just pulled out an intermediate range treaty. He's pulling out of all the treaties. You know, somebody's got to this dude. Mike, everything he ran on is like flipped.
Yes.
He got more flip-flops than John Kerry and Walmart. You know? I mean, Mike, seriously, he ran on, we're in a bubble, and then all of a sudden he gets in, and then it's like, everything's like, you know, the roaring 20s, you know? The same with all the wars. What's changed, people? Nothing. Nothing with this dude. This guy just don't care. He's an elitist, he's in a different tribe, you know? That's what it comes down to. It's a different tribe on the same of the same coin, you know, just a different side of the same coin. You know, this guy's not going to be helping us out. No way. I can't see it now. I mean, why is he doing this? You know, why is he and then you notice they say blame Russia for that too. Like, well, they did it. Why should we stand it if they pulled? There's no proof they did it. There's no proof of any of this stuff because it's all BS. Just like Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. We're going around, Mike, we are a wrecking ball around the world. Us, the British, you know, and when I seen us, I'm saying the U.S. government, but unfortunately, they represent this country. And so does the majority of the population that goes along with this crap. You know,
okay, I want to back up here. I want to back up here. First of all, they don't represent this country. They rule this country. I don't see them as representing this country, and I seriously doubt the majority of Americans are in support of our foreign policy right now. We're a very war-weary people at this particular point, and I think the people that I talk to around here, they've really had it with the war agenda. And they're very tired of a government whose entire focus seems to be going around and making the rest of the world as third world as possible, including our own country.
Yeah, it's clear that I'm definitely, I'm not, I mean, I don't know, if Hillary runs again, I don't know. It's like a toss-up between, it's like, two versions of evil now. Like, we have no choice no more, Mike. We thought Trump was going to be it. Remember?
Yep.
We thought he was the one. He ain't the one. He ain't the one.
He isn't. He's been a tremendous disappointment here. And I think the real reason for Hillary and Bill's multi-city speaking tour is to evaluate if there really is public support for her to run in 2020, and I think they're going to be terribly disappointed. Right now, the tickets are going for $750 for the best seats, and I'll bet by the second city they're going to be down to $100, and by the third city down to $10. And that'll be the end of it. Democratic leadership is saying, Hillary, please shut up and sit down, because you're a detriment to the party now. So I know she wants to run in 2020. I don't think she's going to be able to get the support to do it.
Hey, Mike, I wanted to talk about, if I still got time, like two more topics, but like the refugees, the caravan coming. I was looking at some of the videos. Some of those people got some nice gold chains around their neck. I'm like, what the heck? Yeah, I'm like, I mean, they didn't look dirty or nothing. Definitely a scam. It's an operation, just like the same playbook that's going on in Europe, Mike. It's just a different part of the world.
Exactly right. You're exactly right. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the program.
And then real quick, did you hear about it's called Spear Operations Group located in Delaware? It's some kind of mercenary, like, assassin group that's ex-military and active National Guard in there working for the UAE. It was on the Duran. If anybody watches the Duran, Mike Sloboda was talking about it with, I forgot his name on the Duran, but there's like the guy who's running it's out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but it's basically a hit squad, and they get paid $1.5 million a year and $25,000 a month to be in Yemen to kill political leaders. If anybody can watch that video on the Duran with, it's the recent feud with Mike Sloboda. Definitely, check that out, because I was like, holy crap! I mean, how many of these mercenary groups do we have? I mean, mercenary groups. These are mercenaries for, like, just assassination, not private security. Kind of like Blackwater is like security / maybe assassin. I don't know.
No, they're hired killers.
Other group seems.
They're hired killers. Let's call them what they are.
Wow, what a, Mike, I don't know. It's like everything is just upside down anymore, but, all right, Mike, that's all I wanted to talk to you about. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Getting on back to the issues over the INF, interesting little story. The Russian deputy foreign minister, and this is in Russia Today, is out there saying that Moscow will take, quote, military technical, end quote, measures if the U.S. goes on breaking treaties. So now the Russian government is calling out the U.S. government for its continuing ongoing policy of breaking treaties. And Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said the U.S. policy of breaking treaties is crude and blunt. And if it continues, Moscow will have to take retaliatory steps, including military technical measures, without really saying what that means. But at least Russia is putting it out there, saying that, yeah, the U.S. cannot be relied on to stick to treaty agreements. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome. Pardon me, I have a bit of a cold today. Anyway, welcome back to our show. Phone lines are open. And the United States has not actually begun the formal process to withdraw from the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Right now, they're just talking about it. But Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is out there saying, maybe instead of just withdrawing from it, maybe it's time to bring back START and perhaps enlarge that. Now, START, of course, is a much more comprehensive strategic arms reduction treaty. And that is definitely on the path toward nuclear disarmament, which I think all of us pretty much agree would be a good idea. We don't have the risk of nuclear war. We don't have the production of these nuclear weapons and the radioactive waste that accompanies that, which nobody still knows what they're going to do with. I think Lavrov has a good idea. I don't think it's going to fly in the current neocon warhawk climate in Washington, D.C., where everybody goes to bed at night dreaming of bigger bombs. Okay, now, over in Gaza, the Great March of Return has now passed 6 months. And the march is all about demanding that Israel lift their 11-year illegal blockade on Gaza and to allow the Palestinian refugees to return to their villages and towns as promised by Israel and by the United Nations. Now, according to the Al-Mazan Center for Human Rights, since the start of the protests more than 6 months ago, over 150 Palestinians have been killed in the demonstration. At least 10,000 others have been injured, including 1,849 children, 424 women, 115 paramedics, and 115 journalists. And by the way, nobody's making a big fuss over their executions, the way they did Khashoggi. Of those who've been injured, 5,814 were hit by live ammunition, including those expanding butterfly bullets. According to the Israeli media, one soldier was moderately injured due to shrapnel from a grenade thrown by a Palestinian from inside Gaza, and one Israeli soldier was killed by a Palestinian sniper fire near the fence. So you can see how one-sided this whole thing is. I find it amazing that the Gazans even have hand grenades, considering how tight that blockade is here. Meanwhile, Ahed Tamimi is out on her world tour. She's touring through Europe and the Middle East, talking about the Israeli occupation, and Israel's officials are very unhappy about it. She's becoming a media star, and I'm sure she's enjoying the attention, and she's getting to stay in all these very fine hotels. But Israel has nobody to blame for it but themselves. They went on in, abused her family. She slapped a soldier. They threw her into jail and made her an instant martyr. And Ahed showed tremendous courage when she confronted that Israeli soldier. But Israel made her a martyr and made her a media icon. So they've got nobody to blame but themselves. Now, perhaps appreciating how bad the optics currently are regarding the Gaza situation, Israel has reopened the people and goods crossings to Gaza. And they were opened yesterday, just 4 days after shutting them down, following a Palestinian, we're told, rocket attack that sparked retaliatory airstrikes on 20 targets in Gaza. So reopening the borders, it appears to be an effort to prevent an escalation in violence and perhaps head off a new war between Israel and Hamas. Because public opinion has definitely turned against Israel in all of this. Over in Jordan, they have this peace treaty with Israel that allowed Israeli farmers to use Jordanian land. And now King Abdullah II is saying Amman is going to terminate that agreement, which goes back to 1994. They want to reclaim that land and use it for whatever Jordan wants to use it for, and they want the Israeli farmers to go back to Israel. So we may be seeing a new conflict over there, because I can't imagine Israel just voluntarily giving up that land. All right, we're going to take another break here for commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go to the phones right now and talk with Tony in Puerto Rico. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. I was thinking about the Elizabeth Warren and the DNA test.
Yes.
And I was just wanted to comment, won't our DNA show that we all came from Africa?
Ultimately, yeah, if you go back far enough. Supposedly there are some common ancestors, but it may not be the Adam and Eve model. Paleontologists and anthropologists know that there were actually several different pre-human hominids that may have interbred, which would have sped up the mutations which led to us evolving. In fact, there's a new school of thought that the Neanderthals did not, in fact, go extinct when the Cro-Magnons showed up, but in fact, they interbred, and that we are a combination of Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal DNA, which, looking at some of our politicians, I tend to think is very plausible.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Okay. Getting to the domestic politics here. Down in Texas, Trump is having a rally for Ted Cruz, and they booked a stadium that holds 18,000 people. 77,000 wanted to attend. So Trump is out there barnstorming for Republican candidates across the country, and as usual, he can pack them in. Story coming out of the Political Insider. There is a new NBC Wall Street Journal poll that shows the Republicans are, in fact, gaining ahead of the midterms. And, the Democrats are out there desperately trying to rev their base up. And they're screaming about Kavanaugh this and men in the women's room that, LGBTQ, whatever. But because of the way Kavanaugh was being treated, because of the way the Democrats are literally physically assaulting conservatives in the restaurants, the Republican base is being energized. And the Democratic lead in the polls has been rapidly eroding. Now, early voting begins today in 25 different states, and there are dozens of these key midterm races could go either way. Now, both sides are claiming victory. We're going to win. We're going to have control of this. But we really don't know. And again, the two wild cards are how much election fraud is taking place and how many illegal immigrants are going to be able to get away with voting, which they're not supposed to be able to do. And all I can say is I hope that the poll watchers and the poll workers in these races that are very much up in the air are keeping watch and trying to do their job here. The FBI is now starting to look worse and worse. They're admitting, first of all, that they used multiple informants in their investigation of the Trump campaign aide Carter Page, and they've been forced to admit that during hearings about all of these shenanigans, they did in fact lie under oath. So the FBI is claiming they're trying to protect information that would identify the identities of other confidential sources who provided information or intelligence to the FBI, as well as the information provided by these sources. And that was their justification to refuse to turn over the unredacted versions of the FISA warrants. But USA Today reporter Brad Heath has sued for full copies of the documents. So if he wins that lawsuit, it's all going to come on out. Senator Tim Kaine has added his voice to those calling for Democrats to fight in the streets. We're going to fight in the streets. We'll fight them on the beaches. We'll fight them on the hillsides. And we'll hit them over the head with empty beer bottles, because that's all the Democrats have got left. But apparently at a campaign event in Virginia, Laura Loomer confronted Tim Kaine on his violent rhetoric and his violent Antifa son. And she came right on out, confronted him in public with everybody standing around saying, your son is a member of Antifa, a domestic terrorist organization. Cory Booker said to get in your face and ask you questions. So the Democrats are starting to get a little taste of their own medicine, which I think is a very, very good thing. Apparently, Mitch McConnell was at a restaurant, and some liberals came on in to harass him, and the rest of the patrons at the restaurant basically told him to leave. They all spoke up and said, get out of here. You're not just disturbing him, you're disturbing me. Get on out of here. So again, the optics on all of this are looking really, really bad. And I think it's going to work against the Democrats in the midterms. I don't know what's wrong with the Democratic leadership. They don't understand that politics is perception. And right now, the perception of the Democratic Party is very, very negative. Or maybe they're so confident that election fraud and the illegal votes are going to get them over the top. They don't care anymore here. A spokesperson for the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party has been suspended for making a threatening social media post about the aftermath of the upcoming midterm elections. Some Republicans are saying the comment should cost him his job. So this spokesperson, William Davis, shared a Facebook status suggesting Democrats should take the GOP to the guillotine after Election Day. And he's been suspended for a week, but a lot of other people are out there saying that he should just be fired. Why do you still have this guy on the payroll here? So Jennifer Carnahan, who chairs the state's Republican Party, said the threats of violence are already prevalent enough without added fuel by party operatives. Well, yeah, the party operatives are out there doing it. Hillary was out there saying, you know, we can't be civil with the Republicans. Maxine Waters was out there. Eric Holder was out there calling for confrontations in the streets. So is Loretta Lynch. That's the party leadership, and they're calling for it. Okay, so Bill and Hillary Clinton are going on this speaking tour, as I mentioned earlier in the show. And presumably what they're trying to determine is if there's popular support for a 2020 run. Meanwhile, the Democratic leadership are really wishing the Clintons would go away because they are bad for the brand. But the Clintons, of course, have made their entire career doing what the Clintons want to do. But as I said, launching this speaking tour with tickets that run up to $750 each betrays a certain arrogance. And I would imagine by the time they reach the third city, the tickets will definitely be going for much, much, much less. I think we're all sick of the Clintons. I don't know about you. I'm sick of the Clintons. Anyway, Republican Congressman Andy Biggs from Arizona has introduced a measure on, early today, calling on the Democratic Congresswoman from California, Maxine Waters, to apologize to the White House for endangering their lives and sowing seeds of discord. The initiative also asks for censure, which would force the Congresswoman from her position and to release a public statement saying harassment or violence isn't a form of protest. And no, it isn't. If you read that First Amendment, it recognizes the right to peacefully assemble. So the measure comes after Maxine Waters encouraged harassment of Trump White House administration officials. And last week, Maxine Waters had said, anyone who sees members of Trump's cabinet, restaurant, or department store at a gas station to create a crowd in order to push back on them and tell them they're not welcome anymore anywhere. And then she was later on MSNBC saying that protesters going to absolutely harass them. All right, so let's talk about the aftermath of Khashoggi. Obviously, a lot of people in Saudi Arabia who had stood by their government's denials early on were flabbergasted when the government of Saudi Arabia came on out and said, yeah, you got us. He was killed in the consulate in Istanbul. It was an accident. There was an interrogation. He got into a fight. Somebody put him into a headlock, and he died. The story, though, has flip-flopped around so much. At this point, nobody is really buying anything Saudi Arabia is seeing. Do you remember when the chief of Interpol disappeared? Nobody made a big stink about that one. Remember when 30 Americans were left to die in Libya? Nobody made a big stink about that. This is being exploited for political gain. And even though Donald Trump seems to want to back off and let this fade away, quite a few members of the U.S. Congress are out there just talking as tough as they can about Saudi Arabia and cutting off relations with them and canceling arms deals, all of which, of course, could result in Saudi Arabia dropping the petrodollar deal, which would have devastating consequences on our economy. And Saudi Arabia has already said if this Khashoggi thing breaks up the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States, they're going to go back and make nice with Iran. And if they do that, the U.S. plan for Middle East domination goes out the window. But I can imagine that Israel is calling up all their pet politicians in Congress, which sadly is most of them, and saying, yeah, get Saudi Arabia, call for war, go on in. Now, Erdogan apparently telephoned Donald Trump and announced that he will reveal all the information Turkey has developed on Khashoggi's killing tomorrow. So we'll see what Erdogan has to say. Now remember, Erdogan came on out claiming there was an audio recording that revealed Khashoggi was actually being tortured. And if he does have that recording and it's legitimate, then this accidental killing story is just another lie. What is really important is somebody somewhere's got to find that body, because if he was tortured, the body will definitely show it. Now, the BBC is reporting that one of the men accused of murdering Jamal Khashoggi had spy training. And he supposedly spent 2 years working in London, with a source describing him as a colonel in Saudi intelligence. Okay, we're going to take a phone call from Mark in Montana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine.
Awesome. Say, I wanted to kind of talk about the censorship thing. I called. I'm the oil field guy. That I live in Montana, work in West Texas, and
yeah,
I had my Facebook account poofed specifically for putting up a article about the irregularities that went on in Texas with the Democratic Party, where they were, registering people that didn't speak English and illegals and all that. And what gets me about that whole deal, I looked online, they deleted my account for posting that, and then there's every one of the Antifa accounts are still up. I mean, really, does that not tell you there's censorship?
Of course there's censorship. And, fortunately, there is a case before the Supreme Court, which if the Supreme Court rules the right way, it's going to open up Google and Twitter and YouTube and all of these social media companies to First Amendment lawsuits, which I'm sure are going to go to class action because all of us were affected.
Right, and I will be right in the middle of that because,
You know, I had 7 years worth of oil field videos and stuff. They just poofed them. I mean, they didn't put me in jail. They didn't send me a warning saying, hey, knucklehead, you can't post that because people find it offensive or whatever. They just poofed my account. I mean, it just disappeared. I got on there and said your account was deleted for violation of terms of service for spreading false news. Fake news. Fake news, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And fake news, it's mainstream media that they're, all these people were arrested and sentenced to jail. How is that fake news?
Well, it's fake news in that they don't want anybody to know about it.
Right, but as far as I'm concerned, and this is just me, I think that Facebook should be subject to the Sherman Antitrust Act, which basically broke up Ma Bell. Well, they used the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up Ma Bell. I think that should be used on Facebook and Twitter and these other people because they are a monopoly. And the second thing I think is that Zuckerberg and all these other idiots that got together the day before they did their big purge, that to me is RICO. That should be a RICO statute. I mean, there's a lot of these people that paid money to be on Facebook. I'm not one of them, that had their accounts poofed. And I'm very confident that these guys got together and they figured that they could manipulate the election, coming up here in a couple of weeks by denying a certain political point from being shared on social media. And that's RICO. And that's also, election fraud and a bunch of other stuff. But I think they ought to go after him after RICO, and I think Zuckerberg ought to be in jail with that knucklehead out of Hollywood, and maybe they should share a cell together for a while.
I'm in agreement here, and I mean, the idea of having corporate social media is antithetical to the original concept of the internet, which was there was never supposed to be a central point through which all the traffic flowed, so that it could not be censored. And Facebook and Twitter and everything were basically set up to lure everyone into using a centralized, controllable platform, which was declared to be immune from First Amendment, and with the end of net neutrality, they can give preference to any traffic that they want, and that gives them a huge amount of control over the population. Now, on the off chance that the Democrats are in fact disappointed by the midterm elections, I would call on the GOP Congress and Trump to say this does need to be fixed. And I don't understand why Donald Trump is not paying attention to what's going on with social media, because he has to understand, or he should understand, just the tremendous role that social media played in his being in the Oval Office, and how hard many of us in the independent media worked to put him there. And from my point of view, it almost feels like he's turned his back on us. Anyway, Mark, stay on the line.
I don't think so, Michael.
Stay on the line. We got to take a break for commercials. I'm going to come right back to you after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking with Mark in Montana, and we're talking about just this out of control censorship by the corporate social media in an attempt to help the Democrats win in the midterm elections. And whether or not it actually violates any existing laws. Not that we see a lot of laws actually being enforced these days, especially in the area of immigration. But it could be construed that Facebook and Twitter and Google and YouTube are providing services to these campaigns which have a dollar value and may represent campaign contributions of services that exceed the allowable limits. And I'm not an expert on this, and I'd like to get a lawyer who would know about it. But in the sense of the midterms, which are only 2 weeks away, the damage has already been done. So, Mark, what do you want to add to that?
What I want to add, I disagree with you a little bit in that you say that Donald Trump, isn't addressing the issue, and he has addressed it. It's just not been reported on. There's some sound bits bites out there of him saying there will be repercussions and some other things. I honestly think that it was a big mistake on their part because the American people are smart enough to see what's going on. I mean, I'm not saying the American people are the sharpest tacks in the in the container, but I am saying that they're smart enough to see this. Here's my big problem with these knuckleheads. They say they're a private entity. Well, they're not a private entity because they're using technology that was developed by the government with government grants, and they're using taxpayer paid for and subsidized phone lines, fiber optic lines, servers, satellites, the whole 9 yards. So it's not. I mean, the internet was not invented by Al Gore. The internet was invented by the American people's tax dollars. So they can't claim that they're an independent, free market, whatever they're claiming, because that's not what they are.
For one thing, the organization that Facebook is using to decide what the American people should see on Facebook is actually government funded. And that could potentially open them up to First Amendment violations and lawsuits as well. Like I said, there is a case before the Supreme Court, which, if it sets a precedent, could basically clean up this whole mess. What is really ironic, though, is that all the liberals who are saying, well, Facebook is a private company, they can do what they want, and choose not to do business with certain peoples, are the exact same ones who are suing bakers out of business for refusing to make gay wedding cakes. So it's more liberal hypocrisy.
Exactly, and it is hypocrisy. Like I said, I really think that the heads of these big media giants, there's a conspiracy, and I hate using that word, but I mean, if you look at them, they meet the next day, they purge, like what they did to InfoWars. I thought that was just absolutely ridiculous.
It was.
I like listening to InfoWars. And that was a concerted effort by PayPal, by YouTube, all of them. They got together, and all of a sudden they poofed their account. So I really appreciate your time, Michael. I love the show, and I will continue listening and donating.
All right, well, thank you very much for that. Thank you for the donations. We got to take a break for station identification. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So we're talking about the aftermath of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. As the Saudi government is now admitting, he did in fact die inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. And it's become this huge cause. And it's turned into a political soccer ball, and it's getting kicked back and forth. But so far this year, 47 journalists have been killed just in the first 6 months of 2018, according to Reporters Without Borders. And the corporate media never talks about it. So why is Jamal Khashoggi an issue? There's no question it's being exploited for political gain. And it may be that it was an effort to force Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to give up his position and put somebody in there who's a little more amenable to Western interests, although it looked like Mohammed bin Salman was right on board with everything the United States wants, or for that matter, Israel. It could be an internal coup. Because after Mohammed became crown prince, remember, he went through that whole thing of arresting other members of the royal family and locking them up until they paid a ransom to be let go again. That's going to make you enemies. That's going to make you enemies. All right, let's talk about the economic news now. We've been talking about the shale industry. We've been talking about it mostly from the context of fracking and how bad it has been for the environment. And all the time, of course, we've been hearing back, well, okay, there's a few problems. Yeah, there's a few problems, but, we're going to get so much oil from it. We're going to be oil independent. We're all going to be rich. It's going to be lots of money. And I keep thinking back to that wonderful movie, Promised Land, which was, I thought, a very good portrayal of the issues involved for the people who allow these fracking wells to be put on their land. But right now, from the economic point of view, a report from the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis is talking about there's a long list of U.S. shale companies that are in the red. And oil prices are down a bit, but they're still close to multi-year highs. That should leave the shale industry flush with cash. Well, the problem is that the expected flow of oil and gas out of those fracking wells hasn't happened. They're not producing anywhere near as much as was being predicted. Now, last week we were talking about this expert in the shale industry saying, we're not getting the oil and gas out of the wells, so the solution is more wells. It was a bad concept right from the beginning, is what it comes down to. Okay. The United States is now pressuring SWIFT to cut off Iran completely from global banking transactions to enforce the sanctions. This is supposed to start next month. And disconnection from SWIFT would make it difficult for Iran to get paid for exports. Now, this, of course, would motivate Iran to join a different system, to move away from the American-centric economy, get involved with BRICS. And again, I think the rest of the world is really getting tired of the U.S. just throwing its weight around. By the way, I just posted a story to whatreallyhappened.com, and I was going to keep it till tomorrow, but I feel like mentioning it now. Donald Trump just came out with a statement saying, we're going to start building more nuclear weapons until China and Russia, come to their senses. So Trump and his people are trying to take the world back to where it was under U.S. global domination following the collapse of the Soviet Union. I don't think it's going to work. For one thing, we already have the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And China and Russia are not the ones being totally unreasonable here. So this is going to end badly. Germany is very upset with the United States right now because their Siemens Corporation had been working on a deal with the government of Iraq for a $15 billion contract to rebuild the power infrastructure in that war-torn country. And Siemens was the leading favorite, but apparently Washington, D.C. intervened and literally arm-twisted the Baghdad government to instead go with U.S.-based General Electric. And Siemens and Germany are saying this is hardly in the spirit of competition. Well, the U.S. isn't interested in competition. The U.S. wants everybody to do business with American companies. They're that desperate for the money. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And again, that's part of the payoff. When the U.S. goes in and destroys a country, is they get involved in the reconstruction, which is presented as the U.S. benevolently helping up a defeated enemy. No, it isn't. It's a money-making operation. That country that has been bombed into rubble, they have to pay U.S. companies to rebuild. And these bombed countries are now looking at other providers, and the United States doesn't like that. That's why the United States is very upset over the fact that Syria looks to be pivoting toward Russia for their reconstruction. Over in Italy, they're admitting that they have had a deficit breach, and they're still refusing to accede to the European Central Bank's demands. Italy's populist government was saying it wouldn't let its budget deficit widen further than currently planned, called for dialogue with the EU to address the differences. But apparently, Italy acknowledged Europe's concerns about the budget, but refuses to change their proposed plan. Italy's banks have been in trouble for a very, very long time, and most of the European Union member states are not at all happy with the European Central Bank. So that's putting further stress on the EU, along with the migrant, the refugee crisis here. The SEC is out there saying that the pension and retirement crisis in this country is becoming an underfunded tsunami, that they're going to start collapsing out there. And Trump is out there spending all the country's money on new weapons, new nukes. Now remember, the reason there's a pension crisis goes back to 2008, 2007, when Wall Street's rating agencies rated those mortgage-backed securities AAA, which made it legal for pension funds to buy them. Pension funds, because they're dealing with retirees, people who don't have the luxury of starting over and rebuilding their lives, they're restricted in terms of what investments they can put their money into. They have to be AAA, which are rock solid, never going to fail, low profitability, but stable. And so pensions all across America, public and private, bought into these. Then, of course, the bubble burst. The fraud was exposed. It all collapsed. And that's why all these pensions are struggling right now. Wall Street should have been made to reimburse all these pensions. But, of course, you, the American people, bailed out Wall Street, and that was the end of it here. Right now in this country, 50% of all American workers are making less than $30,533 a year. It's basically an indication that the middle class in this country is in fact disappearing. Now, Trump is out there making all kinds of grandiose statements about how wonderful the economy is and how we have massive, or rather very, very low unemployment, which actually doesn't make any sense. Setting aside the job participation rate over at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, if there really was very low unemployment, you would see wages and salaries going up as companies worked to attract workers. But with the wages and salaries still at rock bottom, it basically signals the claim that the jobless rate is in the single digits. It's another fraud. Now, despite it all being nonsense and propaganda and bovine excrement, Barack Obama is still out there trying to take credit, saying this has nothing to do with Trump. I started this economic recovery. This is all mine, and the Democrats, and Trump had nothing to do with it. It's amazing here. Now, a while back, Toys R Us and their partner store Babies R Us closed, and they left behind some very big buildings. One of their major providers was the Hasbro toy company, and a large part of Hasbro's sales were through the Toys R Us chain. And because Toys R Us is now closed, Hasbro is having to lay off hundreds of their employees. And they are not saying how many exactly of their 5,400 global employees will lose their jobs, but just over half of Hasbro staff works in the United States. And Hasbro was saying the job cuts will save the company between $30 million to $40 million a year by 2020. I mean, right now where I live, there are no more toy companies. We had a KB toy company in the mall. That one went out of business. With the Toys R Us at the bottom of the hill, that one went out of business. And yes, the big box stores have toy departments. Target actually has a really nice one. But we have to drive further and further when it's time to get Christmas and birthday presents for our grandnieces and grandnephews. And what we're seeing here is the beginning of something that I've been saying was going to happen. That as wages and salaries are depressed, people can't buy things, and stores are going to be closing. And we're already seeing it. And the more that companies rush to use automation or to offshore, the faster they're going to go out of business. And I find it absolutely amazing that none of these supposed brilliant PhD economists have stood up and said, you guys are heading in a bad direction. You cannot have a national economy with ordinary people just barely getting by. because your retail is going to collapse, which is happening. Claire and I were down at the mall over the weekend. A lot of retail vacancies down there. And they're trying to dress them up, you know, instead of just having the screen around it or everything. They're literally putting up displays in these closed retail outlets to make it look like something's going on in there. But it's very obvious. These are spaces that aren't performing. They're not being used. They're not being rented here. Over in Maryland, there has been an arrest of 3 people on one of the largest ever Ponzi schemes discovered. $345 million vanishes. This is the largest ever in Maryland. Obviously, Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme was a lot larger. But 3 men, Kevin B. Merrill, J.B. Ledford, and Cameron Jazierski, basically ran a classic Ponzi scheme. They were taking money from over 200 individual investors, small business owners, restaurateurs, bringing new money in, making payments to the old money, and they just kept this thing going until finally the wheels fell off, and they've now been arrested. And all that money, but from those investors, was lost. Now, back when I was talking about the Siemens deal with Germany, and I made the observation, the U.S. goal right now is not to be a global competitor in the marketplace, but to coerce everybody to come and do business with it. It's kind of like the mafia. You don't go to that bar over there. You come to this bar over here, the one that we own here. And we're seeing that same behavior over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The U.S. is literally demanding that Europe dump the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which would bring oil and gas from Russia to Europe without going through Ukraine, which has always been very touchy. The United States wants the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to be abandoned and for Europe to buy oil and gas from the United States to be delivered by tanker fleet. Germany is basically standing up and saying, we see Russia as a stable energy partner. I sense an implication here that Germany does not see the United States as a stable partner. And if the United States kicks off a global war, that could very well be the case. But the proposed Nord Stream 2 pipeline is going to go through the territorial waters of Finland, Sweden, and Denmark. And the project is being led by a subsidiary of Russian energy giant Gazprom, and it's being implemented in cooperation with the German energy firms Wintershall and Uniper, French multinational Engie, British Dutch oil and gas giant Royal Dutch Shell, and Austrian energy company OMV. And the White House is now threatening, once again, to impose sanctions on all of these European corporations that are participating in the project. But construction work is already underway, and Nord Stream 2 AG, the company in charge of the project, has received the final permits from Germany, Finland, and Sweden. So Germany's refusing to give up on the project. But this behavior by the United States is alienating other countries. This bullying. Instead of going onto the world marketplace with an attractive, competitive product, the attitude is, you will buy from us. Yes, it's more expensive and it's not as good, but you will buy from us or we'll sanction you. That's not going to make any friends at all. Okay, Fox News is now covering the migrant caravan, and it's time for us to do the same. The estimated number of migrants in this caravan is now up to 7,200 individuals. Again, it's kind of hard to take a head count, but the line is now more than a mile long. And these are economic migrants. They're not refugees. And if they arrive at the U.S. border without being an official asylum seeker, they're going to be turned back. And the way the asylum program is supposed to work is they're supposed to apply for asylum while still living in their home country. And unfortunately, due to activism by George Soros and other globalists, they've bent the rules. Certainly they've done that in Europe. Europe is flooded with all of these refugees who don't apply for asylum status until they get there. And they're allowed to stay there while the paperwork is being processed, which can take up to 2 years. So Trump has responded by alerting the Border Patrol, who I'm sure is already well aware that this problem is on the way. The Border Patrol is not equipped to deal with this. And so Trump has alerted the military. He's actually declared this migrant caravan as a national emergency, and he should. Now, Trump is already cutting foreign aid money to Central America for having allowed this to happen. Mexico has lost control of the migrant army. In fact, the migrant army just bloodied the Mexican army. There's just too many of them. We're going to take a break for commercials. We have a caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we've got callers waiting on the line. We're going to start with Nick in Arizona. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Nick, are you there? Or is it Rick? Okay, we lost Rick. Let's go with Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You know, I moved from Florida to Tennessee about 8 years ago, and I got to tell you, I'm glad I got out of there with just the fact that this radical, basic communist is neck and neck in the polls to be governor of Florida should scare the hell out of everybody, not just people that live in Florida. Because, first of all, it shows the general trend of what's happening in Florida. A big part of it is all the people from Puerto Rico bringing their socialist ideas into this country, escaping the destruction of Puerto Rico from the mismanagement and also from the hurricane. But, I mean, to have this guy neck and neck, and they're saying he's in the lead as for governor. I got a friend, he called me about a week ago and said he's selling his house because even if DeSantis wins, the general trend there is tribalism. He says that all the blacks and most of the Hispanics, and then you combine them with the radical leftists, they basically don't like white people anymore. Yes. And they make no bones about it. I mean, it's really blatant. And it's sad. And the other thing about Florida is how important it is in the presidential elections to lose the governorship and the control of the state. And not that Republicans are good guys, but Democrats are a lot more into cheating and election fraud. We all know that.
Yes. And
to have a lot of illegal aliens in Florida will add to that risk. And Florida is definitely a necessary state for any Republican who's going to be elected president. I don't think that we can count on Pennsylvania and Michigan like we used to be able to count on Florida. So this is very alarming what's happening. And just like I said, just the fact that it's close. This guy is like a super radical. I mean, he's like much worse than Obama. And it's just you know, just when you start thinking, hey, maybe the people are getting red-pilled and waking up to the deep state and all this other stuff, wow, I got to tell you, that I thought when I first heard of the guy and I read into him, I thought they'd wipe the floor with him. But he's neck and neck, and he might win. And when I talked to my buddy from down there, he gave me the lowdown. Like, yeah, you just, you know, a lot of Hispanics down there, a lot of Puerto Ricans. They're playing tribal politics, and there's a very like menacing undercurrent of anti-whiteness in the whole election, and he senses it, and that's why he's selling and getting out of Florida. It's too bad.
Yeah, it really is. You know, this anti-white sentiment is definitely being fanned up as a campaign issue by the liberals, but it could spin out of control. and we're seeing that. I mean, look what's going on down there in South Africa and Zimbabwe and Namibia, and I would hate to see that come to the United States of America, but it's definitely being pushed as a political issue. And you're right, it's tribal politics. And the Democrats always like to fan up resentment against the whites because they feed the victimhood of the black and Hispanic population, saying, you know, your life would be a lot better if it were not for the whites. They played the same game with the feminists back in the 1990s, telling women you would be much better off, your career would be much more advanced if it wasn't for those evil white male patriarchal, you know, bastards. And so liberals like to scapegoat white guys, and they have been doing it for a very, very long time.
Well, one of the sadder things in the polling data that I read was that the white women, 2-1, were going to vote for this Democratic Socialist radical. And I guess the feminist demonization of conservatives and white men, and with the Kavanaugh thing, I guess maybe it's working. Hopefully, the polls that are off, but that's very alarming also to me. And it looks like, you know, this divisiveness, although like Trump and the trend was good for the election, they've really polluted the atmosphere in this country. And I don't know if we can get it back.
I don't think we're going to get it back, and I see it as another symptom of impending collapse here. But just to reassure you a little bit, you know, the polls are all over the place. Both sides are claiming victory. Don't forget, on this date 2 years ago, the polls were saying it was an 89% chance Hillary Clinton was going to win the White House. So, well,
I know, but Mike, it shouldn't be close in Florida. This guy's going to bring in a state income tax down there. I mean, that's what bothers me about it, is that it is even close. But what are you going to do? I tell you the truth, I'm really looking at that Tulsi Gabbard. The more I look into her, the more I like her.
Yes.
I just hope, you know, I'd like to see a Democrat like her. Or I used to like Jim Webb also.
Yeah, well, obviously, I disagree with Tulsi on the Second Amendment issue, but overall, I definitely like her. I certainly like her a lot better than Hillary. Anyway, listen, Kevin, going to have to let you go. I'm sorry, Joe, I'm going to have to let you go. And we'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. Sorry about that. I got a little delayed getting back into the studio here. All right. So we have callers waiting on the line here. Let's go with Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. This caravan thing, I have a feeling this is going to get way out of hand. I mean, it already is out of hand, but
yeah, it's already there.
I mean, something just doesn't set right with me with this one. I mean, I have a feeling, you know, the left is going to completely... And I hate to use the left-right paradigm, but they've completely lost their mind. And is George Soros one of the main funders of this?
Well, somebody's certainly funding it. I mean, there's video of guys handing out money to these so-called migrants. Somebody's certainly bringing food in to feed them. There are videos. Apparently, they're not walking the entire distance. Apparently, there are trucks and buses involved in bringing them in. So it's a well-funded operation, and I don't think it's a coincidence that it's happening just before the midterms. And I think the Soros or whoever's behind this is doing it to try and motivate the illegal immigrant vote in this country. But I think the illegal immigrants are going to be looking at these 7,000 migrants and realize they represent competition for social services, for available jobs, and they may not respond quite the way the liberals want them to. But I think the goal is to get Trump to do something that can be used against him and the Republicans. If Trump uses the military to just stop the refugees cold at the border, they're going to scream that he's cruel and heartless, and he really should get with the open borders agenda. If a significant number of these refugees get through the border, they're going to scream that Trump, is a complete failure in terms of his immigration. Now, Trump's already out there on Twitter saying that this is because Democrats are obstructing the existing immigration laws and refusing to work with him on new immigration laws. But again, this is a repeat of what we saw happen to Europe, with all these refugees being brought up from Africa and the Middle East and just poured into Europe. Now it's happening here in the United States. They're going to start bringing up thousands and thousands of refugees from Central and South America to the United States to basically... it's an invasion. I mean, there are photos of these refugees, most of whom are young men. Very few women, very few children, very few elderly. These are young military-age men, and they're burning the flag of the United States, and they're marching toward our borders, waving the flag of Honduras. Now, to me, that looks like an invasion. They're not looking like they're very friendly. And I think Donald Trump was right to declare that this is a national emergency, and I think he is absolutely justified in sending the U.S. military down there to basically stop what amounts to an invasion.
I totally agree with that 100%. And one of the things that I don't understand, and I never could understand this, but with Soros, I know the man has oodles and oodles of money, but money isn't everything. When are we going to send people like Interpol to, something international like that, to go after this man and to lock him up and all his, little henchmen or little cronies? Why is that so much to ask for?
Well, Soros is very generous to all the key politicians. That's one issue. And the other one is because he does have oodles and oodles of money, arresting him is rather pointless because he can just keep hiring lawyers, and whatever charges are brought against him, they can keep appealing and appealing and appealing. He's not going to be around much longer. He's a very old man. And so he's never going to see the inside of a jail cell. What we really need to focus on, though, are finding those people who are going along with this very anti-American agenda and start confronting them. And the best way to do that is to start enforcing the existing immigration laws that we have under Title VIII. I mean, the laws are already there. We can take these mayors and governors of sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, we can throw them in jail. We can take everybody who has hired an illegal immigrant and put them in jail. We can take anybody who has provided housing to an illegal immigrant and put them in jail. We can find anybody who has just driven an illegal immigrant anywhere and put them in jail. The laws are already in place. They're just not being enforced.
I mean, and you're 100% right. They're not being enforced. I mean, I would hate to see, maybe Trump does need to be a dictator to get all of this in place. Maybe that's what it needs. And then when this is all over, he needs to step down, resign, and step down. And, once he does bring the country back, I mean, maybe that's what's needed. I hate to say that, but maybe that is what we need to do.
I think still that we're headed for a Soviet Union-style collapse, and it's going to be up to the American people to reform this country. And I would say that a good place to start is go back to the original Constitution and the first 13 amendments, and just start over from there, and just go back to being our nation for the American people.
I agree. Well, that's all I had for you, Mr. Mike. I hope you have a wonderful show, and give Miss Claire the best.
I certainly will. Thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to Rick in Arizona, who got back on the line. Rick, what's on your mind today?
Oh, just a couple of things, Mike. I think all these business owners in this country, they want these hardworking young men coming into this country. They support Trump. Trump's all bark and no bite. He hasn't done anything. Now, as far as oil shale goes, North Dakota pumps 1 million barrels a day, and they've got a legacy fund that's a rainy day fund that they spiff off the sale of oil, and it's over $5 billion, and it grows every month. So I don't see where, I don't know about other states, but I can tell you they're producing oil in North Dakota as much as Saudi Arabia does.
Well, yeah, the U.S. goal has been to become an oil producer, oil exporter, and we just put up another story at whatreallyhappened.com that Angela Merkel is now under pressure from Trump opening up Germany to U.S. liquefied natural gas sales. So,
yeah. And another one more thing about, people talk about NATO and why Europe doesn't pay their fair share. We got to remember we occupied Germany. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons why Germany doesn't pay as much as the government wants. Basically, what the Trump administration is demanding that the Germans pay for the occupation of their own country. It's almost kind of like how the Israelis are doing it to the Palestinians.
Yes.
Because overall, Germany is an occupied country. I mean, they cannot just kick the Americans out. Just go ahead and try it, Angela, and see how far you get. So they want the Germans to pay for their own occupation. And thanks for taking my call, Mike.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot, Rick. We're going to let you go here. The phone lines are open again. Getting on back to the migrant caravan, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen is saying the agency is focused on rooting out potential criminal gang members who may seek to exploit the so-called caravan of Central American migrants. And it sounds good, and I certainly hope that they can do that. My concern, of course, is Guatemala has already arrested 100 ISIS terrorists. And there are probably more inside that caravan. Now, I don't think this caravan, when it gets to the U.S. border, it's inside Mexico. Mexico couldn't stop them. I think when they get to the border, they're not going to stand in line to be processed. I think they're going to do exactly what they did to the border between Guatemala and Mexico. They're going to tear down the gates and just flood on in. And at this point, I would encourage Trump to have a zero tolerance policy down there. If these people want to live in the United States, there is a legal immigration process they are welcome to go through. But it is just ridiculous to have this idea that anybody can walk into anybody else's country that they want, which is not a universal truth. You try walking into Mexico without permission, see what happens to you. In fact, if you want to be fair, let's have an immigration policy that's the exact mirror of the one in Mexico. You can't go down there and get free stuff. You can't go down there and just get a job. You go down to Mexico without the permission of the Mexican government, you are going to jail. What we have to do is cut off the incentives that are bringing people into Europe and into the United States. And again, make reference back to that video of these guys standing in this migrant caravan handing out cash. Now, Trump is out there saying that full efforts are being made to stop the migrant caravan. I'll believe that when I see the artillery down there on the border. And of course, is out there blaming the Democrats for not supporting tougher anti-immigration measures. Well, again, the laws are there to grab these people and just send them back home. And they're not being enforced. It's like this ridiculous idea that when an illegal immigrant is arrested for committing a crime and he's thrown in jail and he serves his jail sentence, he's let back out again. He should be, or she should be grabbed right there and just thrown back over that fence. If Trump does not, in fact, halt this migrant caravan at the border, it's going to be seen as a major, major failing. And it's going to have serious implications for the 2020 campaign. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Mike, I just, by the way of talking about Trump, I just saw him before when I was at the gym. I think it was either on Fox News or CNN. I'm not sure which one of the TVs that they had on it. He was bragging that Germany has agreed to buy natural, what do you call it, liquid gas? Whether it's true or not, I don't know. How much they're going to buy, I don't know. But he should be worrying about this caravan instead. That's what his main concern should be now.
I agree.
I don't understand how Europe goes. Europe should tell us, we don't need NATO anymore. Goodbye, thank you, and that's it. We're not afraid of Russia. Russia's no threat to us. That'd be the smartest thing for them to do. And it would probably be the best thing for us, too. And what Trump needs to do right now is get at least a division of either Army, Marines, or a combination of both on that border. Also use Navy patrol boats, river patrol boats, and that's the way to stop it and make it very clear. Now, I'm not saying we should definitely don't open. I'm not saying we should shoot. Absolutely not. But I know what CS gas can do because I've been I've been trained in it and all that. I know what pepper spray can do. I've been trained in both of those things, especially CS. You get enough troops together, they're firing CS gas, and it has to be fired at them while they're in Mexico, because if you wait till they cross in, then it's like they then protected by these corrupt judges that we have. You got to fire it at Mexico before they are able to cross the Rio Grande or whatever border and they'll disperse. They won't come any further. Believe me. You get exposed to that stuff, you don't want to do anything other than get out of there.
Yes.
So that's what he needs to do.
That's going to be a tricky issue, because you're firing munitions, even though it's just tear gas. You're firing munitions onto a foreign sovereign nation, and it would be nice if Mexico were asked ahead of time. Is it okay for us to use tear gas on your territory?
Well, we don't seem to care when we fire live ammunition and missiles at sovereign countries in the Middle East, like Syria. That seems to be okay. So to fire some gas at people who are trying to storm our border, maybe I don't know about international law, how it looks on it, and he could lean on the Mexicans, because the Mexicans were supposed to stop. They were supposed to stop this caravan in the first place. Now they seem to be aiding it. So no, I think we'd have every right to open fire with that kind of CS and pepper spray and whatever else we got like that, and that would stop them. They may be
of crowd after crowd after crowd just pouring into our country, and Americans should be looking at what happened to Europe with their open border policy and realize that's all going to be happening here. It's already starting to happen here.
And stop acting like you're not like you're not the president, like you're criticizing what's going on. You're in charge. Do it, okay? And people need to do that. They need to tell this guy right now, enough talking, enough tweeting. Put the military in the border. Don't worry what the Democrats say. Don't worry about what the Main Street or the prostitutes or the corporate media say. Do it. Do it if you want to ever be reelected, and do it if you want the Republicans to retain Congress. Because I'm telling you, he is.
You mean the Republicans to retain Congress?
I mean the Republicans to retain Congress. He's showing me nothing but weakness. Big mouth. Unlike Teddy Roosevelt, he's got a big mouth, but he carries a very small stick. I'm not interested in the Middle East. We have no business in the Middle East. We have no business in Europe. We have no business being on Russia's border or anybody else's border other than this border right here, and stopping us from being invaded. Okay, if it was coming from Canada, I'd say put the troops on the Canadian border, no matter where it's coming from. If it's coming from the sea, I say use the Navy. But whatever it is, you got to do it now. The Border Patrol is not equipped to do this. They're not a military force. There's no posse comitatus involved in this. You know why? Because this is defending the United States, defending the United States border. This is not for, the civilian law enforcement. Stop them from coming in. You want, at that point, when you detain, if and when you have to detain them, you can turn them over to the Border Patrol for processing. But they shouldn't even get onto this side of the Rio Grande or any other part of the U.S. border in the first place. Fire that tear gas, the CS, fire that pepper spray. They'll turn. They'll run. They'll go the other direction. Believe me. Trust me. Got to stop it. You got to stop it now before it's too late. That's all I got to say, Mike.
Well, I agree. If that caravan gets into the United States proper, it's going to be a political disaster for Trump and the GOP. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Jeff in St. Paul, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, hi. I called a few weeks ago about those, pop-ups, mostly Amazon. Well, I haven't had any for a few weeks, but I did get one today, and I didn't really look at it. I just killed it. But what's been happening a lot is I'll have your webpage open, and then I'll hit one of your stories, and it'll make a fresh page with that story, right? So
Yes.
I can step over to that and read it. Well, a lot of times the story itself the title will go from www.whatever.com to about.blank, and there's nothing there. And that's happened like 10 times today, and it's been happening a lot.
Okay. Well, is it happening on the member stories?
I'm looking at just going down your straight stories, the ones on starting on page 1 and going down and forwarding to the next page. And I'll open up 4 or 5 stories, and then as I go through them, a bunch of them won't display. It had loaded the stories, but when I go to focus on reading that story, then the title changes to about.blank, and there's nothing there.
Okay, well, first of all, I did identify and remove the advertiser that was putting up the Amazon pop-ups and also some malware on my site. But if you're getting this behavior following a link to another website, there's obviously not much that I can do about that. I'll take a look at the issue and see if I can figure out what's going on after the radio show today.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. I got to be very honest. There are times I wish I had the financial means where I didn't have to deal with the advertisers at all, because the industry it lacks maturity, shall I say, and even worse, the companies keep trying to put more and more of the work onto the publishers, like we're not already busy enough here. Okay, so getting on back to the migrant caravan. Story out of Touchstone Connect asking who's financing and organizing this clearly hostile invasion of America. And Guatemala's president was quoted in their largest newspaper as saying at least 100 ISIS members are in fact inside the caravan. So why are they coming this way? Well, there's, free money on welfare, free medical care, free housing, free education, free food. They're going to get better treatment from the U.S. government than the American people. And according to this article, they're pointing the finger of blame at George Soros and Hillary Clinton. And they're also raising up the fact somebody is trucking in food and water for these people on the way here. And obviously they're being brought in here to vote Democrat. And they're asking, is there a limit to how many immigrants America can absorb without creating chaos? Well, we're already starting to see the chaos, and we're already starting to see the decline of our culture. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with a phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And during the break here, I keep one web browser vanilla, just installed, no plugins, no add-ons, no blockers. And that's what I check my own website with. And I was not able to duplicate that problem with about.link. So there may be some hijackware on this individual's machine. All right, let's go to the phones now. Mike in Brazil, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was just going to bring up a couple of issues here. First of all they need to do is grab some of these people who are handing out food and WhatsApp cash to these invaders and ask them exactly where did they get the money, who's financing the buses to transport them, who's paying for the food. Okay, just submit them to an enhanced interrogation, and I can tell you for sure they're going to spill their beans. Okay, and the second thing that bothers me is that the last I checked, we do have a Second Amendment in the Constitution, which is expressly written for the security of a free state. Now, when you have a bunch of invaders in the thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, why aren't the people of Arizona, New Mexico, California, and all the adjacent states, why don't they mass up at the border, all with their rifles, and give them a stern warning. Anybody crossing over will be shot and killed. End of story. You don't need the military here. You don't need the police. You don't need ICE. You don't need the Homeland Security. You don't need any of that. All you need is to enforce the Second Amendment, because this is why we have the Second Amendment, to keep invaders at bay. Now, the Israelis are shooting Palestinians, and the Palestinians are not trying to invade Israel. Now, are they? And they're shooting them, and they're killing them. They're killing scores of them. Now, why can't we do the same thing?
Well, I think it's a very dangerous and bad idea, and I would rather have the organized U.S. military guarding our border, because that is supposed to be their job. And I think with a significant show of force, including heavy weapons, that is going to be a deterrent. As far as grabbing the organizers of this caravan in Mexico, again, that would require carrying out arrests on foreign soil. And I'm not sure how Mexico is going to respond to that, especially after Trump started cutting off foreign aid funding.
It wouldn't be too difficult to have some kind of, I'm sure there must be some international treaty that can take care of this issue, because if something like this would happen to them, I'm sure they would seek our help, right? So it only follows that. Imagine, I mean, we don't know how many caravans are on the way. There could be 2, there could be 3 or 5 or 10. Who knows? What is the limit? And Donald Trump, like the previous caller, that gentleman said, Donald Trump is all bark and no bite. I mean, he campaigned on reducing immigration and, pulling the troops out and all that. The guy is a big disappointment. He's like, I can't believe I voted for him. And now I feel like I feel like a complete idiot. And like you said before, the only way I would ever vote again for him if Hillary Clinton would be the contender again in 2020. But hopefully, let's hope that she's going to be out of the picture soon. And anyway, this is all I have to say, Mike. Thanks a lot for taking my call.
All right, thanks an awful lot as well. And I would like to see this crisis resolved without bloodshed. That may not be possible, but this is a test of Donald Trump and his immigration policy, and it's definitely being done to provoke that crisis, and we're all going to be watching to see how Trump handles this challenge, because if that caravan gets through into the United States, it's going to be seen as another Trump failure. And the liberals are definitely going to exploit it. And it's an uncomfortable situation, because if Trump does stop the caravan and turns it around, the liberals are going to scream, oh, he's cruel, look how heartless he is, and so forth and so on. But from where I'm sitting, when you have a bunch of military-aged males, and by the way, Donald Trump made a point of saying there were Middle Easterners in that caravan, and the corporate media just excoriated him. But Univision just came on out and said, yes, they confirmed it. There are Middle Easterners in this caravan coming up from Honduras. But if Trump fails to stop them from crashing on through into the United States, it will be seen as a failure. And Trump will get on Twitter, and he's going to blame the Democrats for opposing his wall. But it is time to call out the army, because this is an invasion. These military-aged males are marching on our southern border, waving the flag of a foreign country. All right, let's take another phone call. Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Michael, if Donald Trump was really, really serious, and this seems to be like an invasion, why doesn't he recall the American ambassadors, stop funding these countries, and then put a sanction on all these countries that's coming, that's hurting America, allowing its invaders to get close to America? Why doesn't he do that?
I think it's a good idea. I mean, this shouldn't be our problem. They should have been stopped at the border with Mexico. Actually, they should have been stopped at the border with Guatemala. And these countries just let them all walk on through, probably because of decades of this lax attitude about, more illegals going to the United States. But it's time to put an end to this, and I'm afraid that stern measures are justified.
Right. Well, if you can take money away from the Palestinians and put sanctions on North Korea and other places, he's very negative toward Cuba. Do the same thing with Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. But unfortunately, I think Wall Street will not allow him to do that because they're making so much money from those countries.
That could definitely be a factor, but Donald Trump has announced he's going to be cutting U.S. foreign aid to those governments. And whether that's going to cause these governments to start policing their own borders better, I don't know. Again, for many of these countries, they're glad to be rid of this part of their population. We're not getting the best Hondurans or the best Bangladeshi. We're getting people that weren't really making it in their home countries. And I'm sure their governments are actually glad to be rid of them.
I would agree. And another thing that I would do, I would put a stop from anyone from those countries sending money back to those countries. I don't know if you can do that legally, but I would definitely do that.
I think Trump has talked about that already because it is a huge drain on our economy with these millions of illegal immigrants who are being paid under the table and they're not paying any taxes and they're just sending money back home to their home country. And it's just, again, it's another strain on our economy.
Right, and it has to stop. Well, Michael, thank you very much. You have a nice day.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. We're going to do a shout out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And let's see, there we are. Getting on back to it, down in Georgia, one of their candidates for governor, the Democratic candidate, is saying that illegal immigrants will be part of the blue wave of voters who will restore the Democrat control of the country. And of course, it is illegal for non-citizens to vote in our elections. And the Democrats are out there openly saying, yeah, we're going to have the illegals vote for us. Back in 2016, they succeeded in getting most of the states to abandon their voter ID laws. It's just the Democratic Party has gone outlaw. And apparently, another report coming up from the migrant caravan, this was at CNN, reported that these migrants are shouting Donald Trump is the Antichrist. He's going to the dark regions. And they were flipping the bird at the camera, which had to be pixelated out. Really nice people that are coming to try and be in our country. Now, Pat Buchanan has come on out saying this migrant caravan is Trump's chance to stop the third world invasion of the West. And I'm glad he's using that word because that's exactly what it is. And apparently, Pat Buchanan was being interviewed with Raymond Arroyo on the Laura Ingraham show, and he said, this is an opportunity ahead of the midterm elections to show he does have the willpower to stop mass immigration at America's borders. Well, the current estimate is the migrants are going to hit the U.S. borders on the day of the midterms. So its value as a political flag going into the midterms may be diminished. But clearly this caravan is a ploy to force Trump to do something unpopular before the midterms. It's not a coincidence. This happened right here. So, and again, if you don't think it's an invasion, look what they did to the Mexican police. They bloodied them up really, really good. Mexico should have sent their army to deal with this. So now there's already a second caravan of 2,000 illegals, and it's set off this weekend. And they all think Donald Trump is the devil because he wants a country with borders. And George Soros and his organizations have sold this idea around the world that there should be no borders, that if this population over here has for generation after generation built up a really nice country, that you have every right to just walk on into it and live there. That's what they're selling around the world. Now, Senator Lindsey Graham has come on out relative to the midterm saying, do not give the Democrats power in Congress, because Nancy Pelosi will welcome the caravans here. And yes, she will. She's a big fan of open borders, big fan of allowing illegal immigrants to vote. And the Democrats are going to bankrupt this country because they're bringing in these illegals with the lure of all kinds of free stuff. In fact, you need to look at every major metropolitan area that's been under Democratic control for a while, and you'll see what the entire country is going to be looking like if the Democrats get back into power and flood more refugees, illegal immigrants into this country. Look at Baltimore. The entire country is going to look like that. All right, getting on over to Germany, there's outrage. Apparently, there was a migrant gang that took turns raping a 13-year-old girl, and they were basically handed suspended sentences. Now imagine, is that going to start happening here? That the refugees and migrants are going to be treated with kid gloves no matter what they do, because the agenda is to blend them all in. Now, the Trump administration is, according to a memo obtained by the New York Times, the Department of Health and Human Services is adopting an official definition of gender that's based on a biological basis that's clear, grounded in science, objective, and administratable. Apparently, they got tired of all these demands that government forms start having all these little tick boxes for all the different genders. So the Trump administration is basically looking that for official purposes, we're going to return to common sense. There are two genders. It's not subject to whim, and it's based on the plumbing that you were born with. There are men, there are women. I agree with this. This whole gender fluidity nonsense has gone way, way out of control. And I see it as, again, a symbol of some of the decadence that suggests this country is heading for a Soviet-style collapse here. Now, Elon Musk, despite his problems over at Tesla, he's involved in some other projects. And apparently, he's been building an underground transport network across Los Angeles that will open in just 11 weeks. It's built by a company Elon Musk owns that's called the Boring Company. And they're opening the first stretch of tunnel. And these are rapid transit, and they mean rapid transit because it's going to carry people along on what are described as skates at up to 150 miles per hour. And this first section of tunnel that's opening up sits beneath the suburb of Hawthorne, south of downtown Los Angeles. Well, that will be very interesting, and I certainly hope that they remember to build the sides of the tubes to withstand earthquakes. I remember following the Northridge quake, which Claire and I went through. That was our big one. And it came on out. Los Angeles was just starting to build their subway system. And it turned out some of those tunnels collapsed, and it was revealed that the tunnels had not been built as thick a wall as was called for in the plans. Somebody had cut corners and basically put the money in their pocket. And it was a big, big scandal. Up near Vancouver in Canada, they are rocking and rolling. They've had a whole bunch of earthquakes along the Cascadia Fault, 3 of them above magnitude 6. And this was sufficient to generate a tsunami message here in Hawaii to basically reassure us there was no tsunami coming. But a lot of people have been worried about that Cascadia Fault. If it were to rip loose along its entire distance, the resulting tsunami would basically wipe out the entire coastal region. So I can imagine that people who are living in British Columbia and Washington State are being very, very nervous right now about this seismic activity and whether it's going to continue. Are these foreshocks? In the Eastern Pacific, there's a new hurricane. This one's Hurricane Willa. It's strengthened to Category 5, and it's going to be hitting Mexico on Tuesday. Maybe that will discourage the Hondurans. Maybe that'll get the migrant caravan turned around, or at least scattered, so they miss their midterms deadline. Okay, so a hurricane warning is in effect from San Blas to Mazatlan, including Las Islas Marias. A tropical storm warning is in effect from Playa Perula to San Blas and from north of Mazatlan to Bahia Tempehuella. All right, let's talk about corporate social media. And there's another case of censorship where they removed a video produced by Double Down News featuring Guardian columnist George Monbiot discussing the crimes of Christopher Columbus and the British Empire. So it's not just cracking down on conservatives. Social media are starting to censor a lot of different stuff. We know they're starting to come down on critics of vaccines. They're starting to come down on critics of GMO. In fact, they're starting to come on down on anybody who represents a threat to the profitability of the big pharmaceutical corporations here. But there is a pushback. DuckDuckGo is really taking off, and even Mark Zuckerberg is having to admit that people are spending 50 million fewer hours on Facebook a day. And that's still a lot, but it isn't what they used to have. Okay, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And in addition to our midterms, they're coming up on municipal elections up in Canada. And apparently Google just shut down the ad campaign of Toronto mayoral candidate Faith Goldie just before the election. And apparently the local Google offices won't even be open until the day of the election. So, I mean, this is really getting out of control here. Over at Obamacare, remember that horrible website? Everybody was making fun of it. Well, apparently that enrollment portal has now been breached, and the data of 75,000 Obamacare users has now been compromised. Okay, I mentioned this one earlier in the show, and this is an important lawsuit that is before the Supreme Court. It's Manhattan Community Access Corporation versus Halleck. And what they will decide is if a private operator of a public access network is considered a state actor. And if the Supreme Court says yes, then it opens up all the social media to First Amendment lawsuits. Now, we have seen the free and open internet under attack for a long time with online shills, earlier attempts at censorship, the loss of net neutrality, and how people got lured into these centralized, controllable social media platforms, which is completely contrary to the spirit of what the internet was about. You know, in the early days where things were being shared on Usenet, it was impossible to censor. So I'm hoping the Supreme Court will make this ruling so that we can get back to sharing information with other people. And again, I'm speaking on behalf of like InfoWars, because I don't use Google or Facebook or Twitter anymore. I'm on the alternative social media. I don't even use social media all that much. I probably ought to. Okay, there is a new scam making the rounds, and I actually got this one myself. And you'll receive an email that alerts you that your computer has been infected with malware that has been watching you through the webcam for a long time and recording what's on your screen, waiting for you to be visiting adult websites and enjoying yourself. And that if you do not send in a ransom, which is anywhere between 1,000 and 3,000, this malware has also copied off all your contacts who will be emailed a short little video of you pleasuring yourself, as well as an insert of what you're looking at on the screen. So it is a scam, and you should just ignore it. So we really have lost our moral compass as a nation. Okay, over at Waitrose, which is a food company, they have been forced to change the name of its Gentleman's Smoked Chicken Caesar roll because the politically correct feminists are saying that calling anything gentleman's, it's sexist. It's sexist. And they were calling it the Gentleman's Smoked Chicken Caesar roll because it contains anchovy mayonnaise, which is a recipe that's called gentleman's relish in some circles. They weren't being sexist. They were basically indicating one of the ingredients here. Down in Argentina, back on the 14th of this month, in the city of Trelew, pro-abortion feminists threw Molotov cocktails at a Catholic church and the city hall. And the women were shouting, "Abort your heterosexuality, death to the macho, and lesbianize yourself." So, again here. Apparently they were also scrawling graffiti on storefronts, privately owned homes, and churches. I don't think that's a good way to get popular support for your position. I think if you want to affect real socio-political change, you need to build up your popular support. You've got to be nice. You've got to lure people in to your point of view, not spray graffiti on their homes and say, "There, now you'll think the way that I do." Okay, we had this story over at Ohio University where this student, Anna Ayers, claimed to have received death threats and harassing messages because of her LGBTQ status. The authorities have determined she sent them herself, and she has now been arrested and charged with 3 counts of making false reports. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And as you know, Donald Trump came on out and said he has a natural instinct for science, and social media just went completely wild. The comment was made in the context of climate change. Trump was expressing his doubt about the recent report issued by the UN IPCC. And there is good reason to doubt it, but I don't really know that there's such a thing as a natural instinct for science. I mean, obviously, the more intelligent you are, the more you can go through all of this stuff and hopefully make a good choice. And science should be a personal experience, not something that's handed to you by the corporate media. Oh, the science is settled. Vaccines are safe. GMOs are good for you. The world is warming. It's all your fault. Don't think, don't question, don't analyze, just believe. we've got lots of people in white jackets here, white coats, to tell you what to think here. And so the carbon Nazis are out there in social media saying that Trump is putting the globe at greater peril. And of course, the IPCC report on climate change still insists that the world is warming, that it's all the fault of human beings, and that we only have 12 years left before disaster happens. Of course, they've been saying there's going to be a disaster from global warming going back decades, and it hasn't happened yet. Meanwhile, for you football fans, the Colts and Bills had their game recently, and it would not stop snowing. Just kept pouring down, pouring down, pouring down. So again, it is going to be an early and hard winter. Okay, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is out there saying, first of all, she's equating climate change to be as big a threat to the U.S. as the Nazis were. It's an existential threat. And she's now saying that they're going to use the extreme blueprint they used to defeat the Nazis to defeat climate change. That's really kind of out there. First of all, you could see the Nazis, and they were the ones with the guns shooting back at you. Climate change is a completely different issue. But she's out there just, campaigning on this issue. And I have to imagine that probably Democrats are starting to feel a little insulted at how Democratic candidates continue to talk at them like they're morons and that they can't think for themselves. Unfortunately, we've seen too many of the extreme liberals who act like that, who don't think. They just believe, they believe, they believe. Apparently, Spain suffered the worst sudden drop in temperature in a decade. And apparently it started on October 18th and lasted through October 21st. And it went down something like 15 degrees. So it is coming on in here. Apparently this extreme cold front has come across Canada, is now on the upper Great Plains, causing all kinds of issues up there with driving and so forth. Anyway, as you know, one of the things that Trump did that I did agree with is he pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. Greenhouse emissions in the United States have dropped 2.7%. Over in France, where they still claim to be following the Paris Climate Accord, greenhouse gas emissions have increased by 2%. I wonder how much of that is connected to the flood of refugees coming into Europe, who, after all, are exhaling carbon dioxide. Just something to little think about there. Okay, Trump has signed a bill to try and save the oceans from plastic trash. It is getting to be a problem. The plastic is being eaten by wildlife. They're suffering from it. In terms of food stock wildlife, they're eating these very tiny pieces of plastic, which winds up getting into our food, so it's harming us as well. Now, Obama talked about this. They had 8 years to do it, but they didn't. And it is a big problem. So Trump is out there championing it, and that would be a good thing to start using, some of our Navy ships for. We got a bunch of them already out here close to the to the garbage island. Just get a giant dragnet behind them. The big question, of course, is where are you going to put it all? And as a matter of fact, right now, Japan has got a big problem because they go through a lot of plastics and packaging. And China is now refusing to accept any more foreign plastic waste. They were making a lot of money over being this giant landfill for the rest of the world's junk plastic, but they've said no more, and now it's starting to pile up. I understand the need for plastic packaging if you're doing Cardboard and paper, it's too easy to shoplift, which as the economy tightens, that's becoming an issue. But whatever happened to the idea of recyclable plastics? When did that go away? The idea of reusable packaging. Because it is amazing how much trash is generated, even just by Claire and I, and we're just two people. It's, wrappers and blisters and all the rest of that stuff. Okay, apparently they've had some major flooding over in the Texas Highland Lakes. That was end of last week. And another article coming on out here from Investment Watch blog. Where have all the butterflies gone? Insect population has dropped a massive 75% in 25 years. Now, some of that is going to be insecticide use. People don't like bugs in their homes. Pesticides on farm crops. There was an article some years ago in the journal Nature that identified GMO pollen as being harmful to benign insect species. And in this particular article, the specific species was the monarch butterfly, which did suffer a major population decline. I remember when I was a kid, you just see clouds of monarch butterflies flying overhead. And they're starting to come back, but it's still a rare occasion. I mean, here in Hawaii, every once in a while, we'll see one fly across our little back porch area. We are not good stewards of this planet. Over in China, they do some amazing things over there. And they are about to open the world's longest sea crossing bridge. It is 34 miles long. They started building it back in 2009, and it has a snaking road bridge and a section of underwater tunnel linking Hong Kong's Lantau Island to the southern mainland Chinese city of Zhuhai and the gambling enclave of Macau, across the waters of the Pearl River estuary. So that is just going to be amazing. It is 14 miles longer than the width of the English Channel from Dover in the United Kingdom to Calais in France. That's got to be amazing. If they've been building it since 2009, it's probably visible on Google Earth. So I'm going to be taking a look for that after the show. I love Google Earth. I was playing with it back when it was still being called Keyhole before Google bought it. And of course, the pictures are always outdated and sensitive stuff is blurred. But if you are a history buff or a geology buff, it is a wonderful, wonderful tool. And I think parents should have it on their computer for their children to use to help with their school studies here. This idea of religious beliefs getting in the way of service is a complicated issue. And in the case of the bakers who don't want to make a cake for a gay couple or something like that, I side with the baker. In this case, I think there's a dangerous situation. Apparently, there was this pharmacist. This happened over in Europe. And this Ionian woman is demanding that a Petoskey pharmacist be disciplined, and that a store-wide policy needs to be set for how pharmacists should handle religious and moral objections. The issue is that this pharmacist refused to fill her prescription for a drug called misoprostol, brand name Cytotec, because of his personal religious views. And the woman was having a miscarriage, and the drug was being prescribed to her to help her basically get things out. And the pharmacist refused. And I have to side with the patient on this one. It's one thing when you're talking about a cake, it's another thing when you're talking about somebody's health and the possibility they could suffer harm. There has been yet another tainted blood scandal over in Great Britain. Apparently 1,200 patients were infected with HIV from tainted blood, and they were all offered £24,000 to sign contracts saying they would not sue. Then after the contracts were signed, then they were told they'd also been infected with hepatitis C. I remember we had a huge tainted blood scandal here in the United States back in the 1980s in Arkansas under then Governor Bill Clinton. They had a blood company was harvesting blood from the prison system, and they weren't being too careful about testing it, and was sent on out, and a lot of people were made sick. Story out of governmentslaves.info. 14-year-old Christopher Bunch of Moline, Illinois, age 14, died last August. And his death was caused by complications from acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, a rare neurological disease. And he basically developed the symptoms right after getting the HPV vaccine. Now, prior to getting the vaccine, and remember, this is a boy we're talking about, not a girl. Prior to that, his health was perfectly fine. And after he got the shot, he started getting nausea, vomiting, persistent headaches. He would sleep for days at a time. They finally had to take him to the Iowa Stead Family Children's Hospital, at which point he lost his ability to breathe unassisted. They had to put him on a respirator. He was then totally paralyzed on his left side. They gave him anti-seizure medication. They literally surgically opened up his skull because his brain was starting to swell. And if you've got a swelling brain and you don't give it some place to go, it'll crush itself against the cranial bone. But he stayed in critical condition, was put on life support, and he died 2 days later. It's all about making the money. Over in Arizona, they have canceled a vaccine education program after receiving complaints from parents who don't want to immunize their school-age children. And Arizona's pilot program is modeled after those in Oregon and Michigan. Was created in response to the rising number of Arizona school children who are skipping school-required immunization against diseases like measles, mumps, and whooping cough because of their parents' concerns. And parents that were very concerned that the vaccines were going to become compulsory complained to the governor's regulatory review board, and they backed off. Now, I think I reported on yesterday, Japan basically some time ago banned all mandatory childhood vaccinations. And in follow-up studies, it has been determined that Japanese children overall are much healthier than American children, who are suffering all of these multiple ailments after getting jabbed with those needles. Story out of Consumer Affairs is saying that more than half of parents think the flu shot causes the flu. Now, the pharmaceutical industry is now trying to fight back against efforts by the Trump administration to make prescription medications more affordable for Americans. And the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America has reportedly issued a statement of opposition that, for calls to drug prices to be more clearly disclosed to the public, saying that doing so would be misleading. We had a caller into the show last week that was saying, you don't know what you're going to be charged until you're charged for it here. Now, there is a website out there, I've seen it advertised on TV, where you will go in and you will type your medication and your zip code, and it will tell you the pharmacy near you with the lowest prices. But the prices are still very high. And if you compare America's prices for prescription drugs to other countries with the same drugs, it's much lower there. It's just a huge money-making endeavor. Excuse me, fighting a cold. So I'm in agreement. We've got to do something about out-of-control medical costs, and we've got to do something about the poor quality of America's medical care. We have to undo what Richard Nixon did with the Health Maintenance Organization Act and take health care back from being a for-profit racket to being about health care. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is now tracking 127 cases for what they're calling acute flaccid myelitis. The symptoms are virtually identical to polio and were originally reported as polio. And I want to know if these people received the polio vaccine. We'll be back after these few words with the last segment of our program today. Aloha America, welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here, and the corporate media is all over the migrant caravan, I guess is the term of craft officially now. And the liberals are out there saying, well, these poor people, Honduras is just a ruined place and their lives are very desperate, which I'm having trouble reconciling because looking at some of these people walking along the road, they seem to be very well dressed. And as a caller pointed out earlier, they're wearing jewelry and they don't seem to be lacking for food, to put it politely and delicately. And this is clearly organized. Now, James Woods basically came on out pointing out it's over 2,000 miles from Honduras to Arizona. And even if they walked 20 miles a day, it would take 100 consecutive days. That's over 3 months. And yet they've gotten up to Mexico already. Of course, we already know that there are trucks and buses being used to transport them. And James Woods comes on out and says, yeah, somebody's providing food and water. And he says, it's hard to believe a bunch of people just randomly decided to pack a lunch and walk 2,000 miles to anywhere. And he's saying, where are they sleeping? Where are they going to the bathroom? But this is definitely very well organized. And again, it does seem like this is being done to bring more Democratic voters into the country, because the Democrats are all over the media. Oh, we've got to feel sorry for these people. We have to let them in. We have no choice. They deserve to be here. No, they don't. If their country isn't working, they should fix their country. And we're already seeing it in Europe. When you open your borders and you let a bunch of third world people come on in, you bring third world problems with them. And that's going to be happening here. Every sovereign nation has a natural right to secure their borders against invasion, and that's exactly what this is. A bunch of military-aged men waving the flag of a foreign nation marching on our border. No, I don't feel sorry for them. And James Woods is right. This didn't just spontaneously happen. This is being organized. This is part of, remember when it started over in Europe and there was a massive march from the Middle East to Europe, and that was getting all kinds of coverage. This is it. They're going to start the same thing they've done to Europe, they're going to do to the United States of America. Okay, apparently CNN is now out there saying that Canada's legalization of recreational marijuana could hurt cannabis farmers in poorer countries. So I don't know what CNN is really thinking. Those farmers in the poorer countries supply the cartels. Okay, there's the music. Time for me to head on out of here and do the Jim Goddard Show. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I am sure he's got all kinds of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Email, face-to-face, SneakerNet. Please remind everybody that the corporate social media is heavily censoring all conservatives. to try and swing the election to the Democrats. So we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.